The 16th branch of Megamart and Macromart supermarkets in Bahrain has opened in Sahala. The best offers are available to the customers at affordable rates. Everyone is welcome. During and around the opening day, a variety of fish including salmon, meat and dairy products, roastery, frozen items, food and non-food items, groceries, fruits and vegetables, electronics, garments and ready-to-eat food items are available to the customers at affordable rates. Hearty welcome to all. Megamart and Macromart, your favorite shopping destination.
A man on a mission, a doctor with a vision, committed to make a difference in the field of healthcare in Bahrain, the corporate chief executive at the American Mission Hospital, Dr. George Cherian. A private healthcare facility with a legacy, standing tall to its commitment of caring for the community, the American Mission Hospital has come a long way since the American missionaries laid foundations of the esteemed initiative. Samuel Zwima was the man then, and the latest among the many who took the mantle forward is Dr. Cherian since the last 11 years. A pediatrician specialized in neonatology with his career spanning of nearly 30 years, the professional who leads a crucial sector in a happening world believes that he understands what is important for his patients and is sure of his role to bring all of the resources at the AMH to make a difference in caring his patients. Discussing on a range of topics from ethics in healthcare, commercial aspects and challenges amidst the pandemic and the COVID-19 vaccination. On BizTalk from BMC Global Life is Dr. George Cherian, Corporate Chief Executive and Chief Medical Officer at the American Mission Hospital. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Samuel Zima, a man whose commitment and dedication gifted Bahrain a legacy in healthcare segment, the American Mission Hospital. From the 1800s, standing tall to its commitment caring to the community is this esteemed institution. And at the MFS of this great hospital is Dr. George Cherian, joining me live on BMC Global Live's Biz Talk, Success Stories with Business Leaders. Dr. George Cherian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's indeed a pleasure to have you with us on this show, which focuses on success stories of business leaders. I would really not term you as a businessman, because I don't think the segment that you belong to is totally business. But at the same time, it's a business of a kind, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the AMH has a legacy of its own. And since the time the missionaries started it, it has a commitment towards as a non-profitable establishment. Over the years, how do you think this has this changed with the kind of growth and the segment itself getting this change, the non-profit aspect of it? Let's start on that note.
One of the things that I'm most aware of is the prevention of mission drift. The mission was established by Samuel Zwema and the missionaries, as you alluded to, in the late 1800s. And 120 years later, we still continue to be the same institution that Samuel Zwema envisaged. That is to provide care for all segments of the population, regardless of the ability to pay.
Okay.
And the non-profit side of the business, a lot of people think that, well, we have to pay when we come to the American Mission Hospital, so how is it a non-profit mission hospital?
Exactly.
What people don't realize is a not-for-profit business is that each of the monies that come into the mission is actually used to develop the business, rather than the monies, the profits go to individual shareholders, board members, or certainly to senior management. So all of the monies made through running the business of healthcare goes back into developing the healthcare of the American Mission Hospital. And so over the last 120 years, the core mission of providing high quality care at an affordable cost, that has remained true.
Right. So that is Corporate Chief Executive of American Mission Hospital, Dr. George Cherian, joining us on the chat. Doctor, as you just pointed out one thing, when you hear the name AMH, people think it's an expensive setup, you know.
Yep.
But many a time, in many interviews, you have very explicitly explained the fact that it is not the case, and there are certain privileges extended to community. Or
Sure.
Could you tell us more about that, those kind of services?
One of the things that most people do not realize is that out of all of the revenues that we generate from seeing patients, 15% of all of the revenues are set aside for charitable care, meaning that people who cannot afford to pay are either given free care or heavily discounted care, be it expatriates or be it Bahrainis.
Okay.
So that is the mission part of the hospital. People look at the American Mission Hospital and think that we are an expensive hospital. Where this notion comes from is the fact that in order to establish all of the quality parameters that we stand on, there is a base cost to all of that. The physicians we hire, the nurses we hire, the standards of the lab, the standards of the hospital, and the American Mission Hospital was the first hospital in Bahrain that was accredited by an international body, the Australian group accredited AMH in 2006. And since then, we've held multiple accreditations. And currently, we hold the NEHRA accreditation, which classifies hospitals into 4 categories. And we hold the highest standard for diamond rating of our healthcare facilities, all our 4 healthcare facilities. So in order to maintain standards, there is a base cost. We will never cut cost where quality matters. And where the cost is really seen is that none of our physicians are incentivized to do any labs, to prescribe any medicines that the patients don't need. All of them are salaried. So there is no incentive for them to do anything other than what a patient needs.
Okay, so that really prevents that. How do I explain that? That
The
business
the business incentive to do things that a patient doesn't need. I'll give you another example. Every hospital, private or public, has got imaging centers, which has CT scans,
Yes,
MRI scans,
yes.
and so on and so forth. And if you look at all of the private sector, AMH will have its CT scans and MRI least utilized. Whereas if I put a CT or an MRI purely for the motive of generating a business out of it, I would want these machines to be running 14 hours of the 24-hour day. But those machines are there only if a patient needs to be further investigated with a CT or an MRI. So it is not put there as a business element, but it is put there to augment the diagnosis and to treat a patient effectively. So everything that we do, from laboratory to imaging center to the prescription of medicines and the way physicians approach patients, are all centered around that, to always do right all the time.
Right. That's very true to your logo, caring to the community. And Doctor, over the years, I think we have
we have 4 centers now.
4 centers.
4 centers, yeah.
I think the 5th one is also...
Fifth center is being built at the moment. A hospital is being built.
That's a massive one coming up, isn't it? That's catering only to women and children?
No, it's catering to everyone. It has a women and children's wing and a multi-specialty wing. Yeah.
And that's in
That's in Ali. That's in Ali,
okay. So the other 4 centers, one in Manama, SAR,
AMH, and Rifa. Yeah.
Okay. How big is the staff strength at the AMH?
The staff strength currently, we are about 600 employees. Of the 600 employees, about 110 of them are physicians and dentists, close to 180 of them are nurses, and the rest of them are support staff.
Right. And just going back to the previous point that you said about the imaging or the CT scan, because CT scan and MRIs have all become very common these days, and the expense linked to it. It's very reassuring to hear that, at the AMH you don't have to, private or public, healthcare segment took center stage in 2020, isn't it? And people are reluctant to go to hospital these days. So then came telemedicine or telehealth. Where is AMH on telehealth?
We have a platform to telehealth, but let me expand on telehealth. In Bahrain, people have not embraced telehealth as it has been embraced out of the West.
Okay.
It might be a slow change in culture in how people expect to communicate with a physician. So when I talk about the pandemic being, it's been running for about a year, a lot of centers in the West say that 30% of their consultations have moved to the telehealth platform. Whereas in Bahrain, and certainly at AMH, I would say that that move is possibly less than 5%.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, my expectation is that as we go through this year and when 2022, 23 rolls in, there will be a lot more consultations that will move into the virtual platform.
What do you think is this inhibition in this part of the world compared to the West?
I think it's not an inhibition. It is more, people love to sit in front of their physicians and have this conversation. They don't want to have this telephone consultation through the media. Whereas because visiting the hospital is sacred, and they would rather come and see a physician and get their results or whatever it is. But now, increasingly, we are making it easier for the patients to access healthcare through their own mobile platforms. I mean, you come to the hospital, have your blood test done, your results are available for you to look at on your smartphone. And you can have a televideo consult or a telephonic consult with your physician without having to drive in, park, and all of those hassles. So a lot of follow-up appointments will shift to the telehealth platform.
Okay. Joining us on Biz Talk this evening is Corporate CEO of American Mission Hospital, Dr. George Cherian. Doctor, let's go a little into your personal side. Like, what is your specialty? Are you a practicing doctor now?
I'm still a practicing doctor. My specialty is neonatology.
Okay.
I'm a pediatrician, but then subspecialized in neonatology. And for 28 years, I practiced neonatology. But since I've come to Bahrain over the last 11 years, I would say that 98% of my work is admin, but I'm still available for consultations to my doctors for problems with sick newborns and with sick children. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, and I just am not ready to give that up fully as yet.
Okay, you do smile. I'm not telling that you
Yeah.
don't smile. But then how do you break this ice with children, especially you're a pediatrician? You look very serious and sober as CEO.
It's, there are two aspects to me, if you want to sort of say that. When I'm in the consulting room, you certainly have to be very children friendly and very parent friendly. You can't be a serious corporate CEO there. I wear the hat of a pediatrician or a baby doctor, and that's exactly who I am. But on the corporate sector, it's the whole business side of medicine. It's not the most easy and it's not the most pleasant part of the business.
Right.
Whereas the physician part of the business is the most enjoyable part of it. Because you're talking to parents, you see a problem being resolved and the happiness on the face of the parents and a child's whatever it is being resolved. So that gives you so much happiness, and that is very enjoyable. I'm not saying that the other part is not enjoyable, but I certainly enjoy the clinical part of it a lot better than the admin part of it.
But I'm sure you're not doing much of the clinical part. You're more
Not at the moment. Not at the moment.
Do you miss that?
I certainly miss it.
Okay.
Sometimes I wish I would just wake up and then be a neonatologist back in my NICU rather than sit in the corporate office. Yeah.
Was neonatology your choice of passion?
Neonatology, pediatrics was my choice.
Okay.
So while I was training in neonatology, then like all young physicians, you have an option of going into a subspecialty. And during my time of training, neonatology was a completely new specialty.
Okay.
The specialty of neonatology was not even existent. So that developed in the late 1970s, and it was in the late 70s and 80s that I was training to be a pediatrician. And so that caught my eye, and that took me into the field of neonatology.
Right. That's Dr. George Cherian, the corporate CEO of AMH, joining us on BizTalk. Let's take a short break.
During and around the opening day, a variety of fish including salmon, meat and dairy products, roastery, frozen items, food and non-food items, groceries, fruits and vegetables, electronics, garments and ready-to-eat food items are available to the customers at affordable rates. Hearty welcome to all. Megamart and Macromart, your favorite shopping destination.
Welcome back to BizTalk, a talk with leaders who are successful. Dr. Success is a big term, and allow me to say, like, if you take the top 10 success expat or Bahraini medics and businessmen, your name features there. Can you tell us your success story in a nutshell? Like, how did you start? Was this, you said your passion was pediatrics. Where did the shift happen? When did you step into the business aspect?
My shift into the business aspect was purely a calling for me. I had practiced as a clinician for close to 30 years. And I quickly realized that if healthcare had to be provided to a wider group of people, because as a neonatologist, I just looked after babies. Sick premature babies. And if the babies were well, I didn't have to look after them. So I looked after a very narrow segment of a very highly specialized problem in healthcare. But then I realized that if quality had to be expanded to the whole spectrum of healthcare rather than just pediatrics and neonatology, I would have to be involved in some way to reshape or redefine what healthcare was to the general public. And one thing that I was very passionate about from a very young age, once I got into medicine, was that I realized that medicine and healthcare could never be a commodity. It is a right that every single person on planet Earth has to have access to. Just as we have access to clean air, clean water, healthcare and education is a right for everyone. However, over the last 2 decades, healthcare has slowly been commoditized, and it has shifted into the corporate world where there was huge profits to be made out of the misery of people. And there were all these corporate bodies mushrooming to sort of take advantage of that segment of society that was hugely disadvantaged. And most of these corporate bodies was catering to those very people who had the ability to pay and buy healthcare. In fact, if you look at globally and if you look at regionally, 80% of the population cannot afford out-of-pocket expenses for healthcare because it is tremendously expensive. And I'm being very generous when I give the 20% to people who can pay. And I would say that it's less than 10% who can actually afford to pay for healthcare. So what happens to the other 80-90% of people who absolutely have a desperate need and need healthcare? So for me, it was a passion for me to go into the business side of healthcare to make healthcare, high quality healthcare, affordable to everyone, even for those who paid for it and people who could not pay for it. Now, I'm not stupid to say that if there is no money, there is no missions. There has to be money. The engine that fuels any business is money. So money has to come into a business, but that money can come from a well-run, not-for-profit sector of healthcare that can bring patients into your facility. And out of the surpluses of profits we make from that segment, that money can be equally shared amongst people who will still have access to the same quality of healthcare, but at a much lesser cost. So I saw that as a challenge that the world was not actually addressing.
Okay.
The world was either addressing it as universal healthcare through some countries in the West, like socialized medicine, or countries, high-income countries like the US, where it was a for-profit private health sector, or through insurances which were not affordable for the common man. And then you go back to India, for example, where 95% of the population cannot afford healthcare unless the healthcare was provided in a way that was subsidized either by the government through taxation or through a health insurance scheme that made healthcare affordable. So for me, the switch to the business side of healthcare was purely to extend high quality healthcare to all segments of the society that I felt was being disenfranchised by the way corporate healthcare was actually developing. So that was where my switch happened.
So that's why you rightly use the word calling.
Sure.
But let me ask you, doctor, in a different country or in a different hospital,
Sure.
how true or how much practical would that have been possible with you? Because at the AMH, it's a mission
Sure.
scenario, and this ethics of you could be well placed. But think of a larger corporate, as you pointed out,
Sure.
mushrooming elsewhere in the world. How much would you have been true to this calling?
I would say that it is still possible to be very true to this calling even in a for-profit private healthcare sector. There, what I would define as in a for-profit private healthcare sector, money seems to be the bottom line. For the not-for-profit healthcare sector, quality and accessibility is the bottom line. Okay, so there is a slight difference in money versus accessibility and affordability. Now, even in the for-profit sector, as long as medicine is practiced ethically, you can charge for it, but as long as medicine is practiced ethically, the ethical standards are set by leadership. And if
Correct.
that is set, medicine can still be practiced ethically in a for-profit sector. Even though there are shareholders that invest their personal money into the corporate business, they have to have a return on that investment. But yet, how the hospital is run has to be ethically run. So it can still be practiced.
Ethics is a big word in this.
It's a big
field
word. It's a
indeed.
heavy word.
It's a heavy word, loaded word. And Bahrain being such a small country
Sure.
with limited private healthcare centers, I think it's just a decade, right, since we have so many hospitals in the country.
Yep.
Before that, we just had Salmania and the Bahrain Defense Force Hospital.
yeah.
Even King Hamad's latest
Yeah.
addition. So how do you, as a veteran in the field, how long have you been with the AMH, doctor?
11 years.
And in Bahrain?
11 years, yeah.
11 years. So looking at this scenario, how do you place the ethics in this field in Bahrain?
What is happening in Bahrain is that right now we have the public government sector and the private sector. The private sector still today, controls only about 40% of the total healthcare. I would even say 36% of total healthcare is under the private sector, but majority is under the public sector. But with universal healthcare being introduced into Bahrain, and that will be introduced because of the corona, the timeline has shifted a bit. But eventually, the whole idea of healthcare in Bahrain is going to be a universal access to healthcare, where the nationals, the Bahrainis here, can access healthcare in any other government facilities free of cost. Be it King Hamad, BDF or Salmania, it is going to be free of cost. And for expatriates, we will have to have a health insurance that will allow us access to healthcare in any other private sector. Now, what is going to be quite interesting over the next 2 to 3 years is even the government, public sectors is going to function as independent business units. Salmania will have their own budgets and they will have to run it as a business. So they will also have to compete and attract patients in order for them to be sustainable.
I think they're already slowly moving.
Yeah, they're slowly moving in. They have established a structure that there is a CEO of CEO of the the health centers, a CEO of Salmania, and soon they will have to run those organizations very profitably. And the private sector has the advantage of being very used to running it, because we don't have, depths in money that the government sector has. So we are very nimble and lean in how we run our businesses. And the government sector is overloaded with staff, which is a fixed cost. And they will have to quickly realize that to be competitive in this market, their business models will have to change. So there's going to be a significant shift in market conditions in how healthcare is provided, accessed, and costed. Now, what's going to happen in the private sector, you mentioned that over the last 10 years, there have been several private hospitals coming up. And how are they going to function going into the future? There is going to be a significant consolidation of the private healthcare sector going into the future. You can't have too many private hospitals for a very small pie of population.
Exactly.
The population of Bahrain is just 1.5 million, of which is 50% expats, 50% Bahrainis. And most of the private sector is competing for this 50% expatriate section. And as you very well know, the 50% expatriate section, they are not the most affluent. So most of them will have health insurance that will barely cover their emergency needs, but the ongoing needs are not going to be covered by any health insurance. So what's going to happen is that it's only well-run, larger private hospitals will survive. The smaller ones will find it very difficult to survive in a very tight future market condition. So it is my guess that about 20% of existing private healthcare institutions will no longer be there in 5 years from now. But you will see mergers and consolidation and some of the private sectors even becoming bigger, whereas some small players being eliminated from the market altogether because it's a very competitive market.
Right, okay. That was a great insight, Doctor, because you know the field well, that you explained it well. Yes, now people have a wide range of choice, and 2020, I think with the pandemic setting in, though you said hospitals might need to consolidate or the business aspect, I think healthcare segment is one of the segments which fared pretty well compared to the rest of the businesses in 2020, isn't it?
It is what I would call relative.
Relative, okay.
None of the private businesses fared well compared to what our balance sheets were in 2019. Okay. Now, compared to the travel and the hospitality business, certainly healthcare has fared pretty well. However, most of the private sector hospitals have not hit the 2019 targets for 2020. Neither will they hit the 2019 targets in 2021. So I would say that 2020 was a big downslide. 2021 is the slow recovery, but it is a transitional year. And 2022 we will see a positive upshoot. So most healthcare organizations compared to 2019 has had a downward trend over 2020 and 21.
That's optimistic. At least 2022 we might see some.
Exactly.
Right. And also talking about the pandemic, Doctor, we saw Bahrain, for example, Bahrain has been one unique country which offered free test, free care, everything to begin with in the public sector. Slowly, services were extended to the private segment, isn't it? Now we are standing in terms of vaccination. Where do we see the vaccination coming? Is it in the pipeline like that we get it in private sector?
Discussions have been going on with the public sector on rolling out the vaccines to certain private healthcare institutions. But at the moment, the government has taken the line that they are providing large vaccination centers, centralized vaccination centers, like the Exhibition,
and now in
the Citramall. So they have capitalized and utilized malls, for example, where businesses have been pretty bad, and they have centralized vaccination centers there where the public can go and get the vaccines there. Now, that is a good model. However, my expectation is that vaccinations will ultimately move into the private sector, because think of your flu vaccine. Think of your vaccine for your children. You don't go to a central, you go to your personal physician or your private hospital and get your shot. So COVID vaccines will also have a similar. The COVID pandemic is going to finish off in maybe this year, but the COVID vaccines will still continue to be developed, and that will be available like your flu shot in your local private hospitals. So eventually the COVID vaccines will be available in the private hospitals in Bahrain.
And I think UAE has also set the trend of mobile vaccinations, isn't it? Because we saw the test initially at the center moving into mobile. So how practical do you see that happening here?
It is practical to a point, because the problem is wherever there is a mobile, either testing center or vaccination center, you're going to have people gathering. And the social distancing suddenly falls apart. And you've seen some of this in the social media where too many people. So I think, the mobile dispensary concept is practical, but Bahrain being a small country, currently what the task force has done is quite effective in reaching out to the public. Now, where the mobile dispensaries might become very effective is the mobile dispensaries, for example, can go to a certain labor camp, for example, where there are 200, 300 people living close together. They can go there and then can vaccinate 300 people rather than getting all of them to come to a vaccination center. So that there it will become useful.
Great. On that note, let's take a short break with Dr. George Cherian, Corporate CEO at the American Mission Hospital. Welcome back to Biz Talk from BMC Global Life. Joining us this evening is the American Mission Hospital Corporate CEO, Dr. George Cherian. Doctor, picking from the previous segment that we were discussing, COVID, we cannot abruptly end it there without speaking on the vaccinations. Because how much ever we read, we learn all this WhatsApp messages and things like that, it's always good to hear from an expert who is in the field and is keeping abreast of things. Tell us about these fears among the people. Should they get vaccinated or not?
My answer to that is very simple. Please get yourself vaccinated. All of the social media hype that you read and see is just that hype. Vaccination protects you from developing serious complications from COVID. It prevents you from getting into an intensive care unit, and it prevents death. Let me qualify by saying that there's a lot of comparison between vaccines. Pfizer, Moderna, Covishield, Sinopharm and Sputnik, saying that this is 95% effective, the other one is 84% effective, so on and so forth.
At times I even wonder whether people know what's the meaning of these
exactly.
percentages.
So forget those numbers of being effective. Essentially, the reason why everyone should be immunized is that if at all you come across COVID, if in case you're infected with COVID, then you have a far greater chance of recovering from COVID as a mild flu-like illness rather than ending up in intensive care or dying. So vaccinations prevent intensive care admissions and prevents death, regardless of which vaccine you have taken. So if you understand just that in COVID vaccination, then you will realize that why it is important for you to get vaccinated. It doesn't matter which vaccine you take it is important that you get vaccinated. The second question that has come up quite recently is, well, there are new mutant strains.
Exactly.
And with the mutant strains, the initial vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna, are they effective against the mutant strains? Data currently shows that regardless of the vaccine that you've had, because now in Bahrain, all the increase in the R rate or the infectivity rate of COVID is from the...
For joining us on the show, your final comments, your final words.
My final comments is thank you for inviting me on the BMC platform to share some of my thoughts. However, my final thoughts would be this. Health is really wealth. A lot of people don't realize that you cannot afford to lose your health. And what I mean by losing health is you need to preserve and prevent illnesses, because it is much cheaper to actually prevent an illness than waiting for you to become unwell, get into a hospital and then try to fix it. It is both expensive and it affects the quality of your life. We have now the opportunity of increased availability of screening. The social media is an excellent platform by which healthy information about nutrition, lifestyle, everything is available to the public at a click of a button. And I think the public needs to be aware that you really need to invest into your healthcare by staying healthy. And don't wait for you to become unwell to come into a hospital and then blame healthcare for trying to fix it and then blame the cost.
And though I said my final question, but still I would just want one more, ask one more. You just mentioned about social media and the media, the booming media, for example, the platform that we are sitting in.
Sure.
How do you find these kind of platforms, platforms like the BMC? What's your comment on that?
My comment on social media platforms, like anything, there's good and bad in social media and the media. As long as the social media platform stick to facts and the truths, then it is the biggest help for mankind. But there's so much of false news and high-profile news that circulates. People sometimes are confused as to what to believe and what not to believe. And this is where good social media platforms will always rise to the top. Even though it might not be the most popular thing of the day, if you stick to the facts and you put out news that is authentic, and I suppose interviews like this where people in different business sectors can come and talk about the truth of what the business is, then people are going to be far better educated on how to access these mediums.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. A man on a mission, a doctor with a vision. That was the AMH CEO, Dr. George Cherian, who joined us on BizTalk from BMC Global Live. Until we meet next week with yet another guest, this is Rajiv Unikrishnan signing off. Good night. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us. Please allow me to invite Managing Director and Chairman of BMC Global Life, Francis Kaidaratha, and Media Head Praveen to join us to give you a memento, please.
Thank you.